Hello, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to this session today as a part of Black Tech Fest 2022. I'm absolutely thrilled to be hosting this conversation and contributing to jam-packed and inspiring agenda. So by way of introduction, I'm Yasmina. I'm part of the management team at Beam. We transform the way that the world supports those left behind through the power of people and technology. Now, what that means in practice is that we support people who are experiencing homelessness, refugees, and prison leavers into stable jobs and stable homes for the long term. And we do that through our crowdfunding platform. I've spent my career designing innovative programs to attract, retain, and support diverse talent. And I'm particularly passionate about the role that technology can play in opening access to opportunity. And that's why I'm particularly excited about the conversation we're about to have. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Priscilla Chomba Kinywa. Starting out in the world of tech at age 19, working in tech support for the United Nations agencies in her home country of Zambia. She's an expert in digital transformation and strategy with experience that spans 25 years, 75 countries and 6 continents. And she's currently the Chief Technology Officer for Greenpeace International. So Priscilla, welcome and thanks for being here today. To
Thank
get
you.
started, I would love to hear a bit more about your role at Greenpeace.
Wonderful. I'm really excited to be here. Love the idea of all the conversations that are going on in this conference. My role at Greenpeace. So I'm the Global Chief Technology Officer, as you mentioned. Greenpeace is a climate organization working in over 50 countries on so many different continents. So it's a big role, but I absolutely love the ambition that we have. We have a tech vision that is very inspiring, that looks at digital transformation holistically. So not just the usual tech infrastructure that you'd normally see, but looking at tech infrastructure, cybersecurity, thinking about how we actually use data to win campaigns around climate change, looking at how we change our internal culture, how we hire for the century we're in. Things like if I'm hiring a software developer, I don't need to ask you for a degree. So
Yeah.
changing those types of practices internally, but also making sure we really keep a keen eye on how technology is affecting the world, the external world around us. So that's the job that I'm in now, and it's a lot of work, but very, very exciting work.
It certainly sounds like it, particularly because tech is a thread between every element of your business. And what you've just described there shows that it touches on so many different facets. And I mean,
Yes.
you've been working in tech and innovation roles for the entirety of your career. And during this time, the world has become more dependent on technology than ever before. So I'd love to hear from your perspective what the biggest change has been for business.
The biggest change for me is how quickly things change. That's really the
Yeah.
biggest change. And that's one of the things that we're really keenly looking at in Greenpeace of how do we come a technologically mature organization that's ready to harness any opportunities that technology presents to us really quickly. It's
Mm,
very interesting that in some ways it's moving really rapidly, but I see that more on the social side than
mm,
on the actual tech side. I feel like on the tech side, things haven't really moved very much. And sometimes I'm a bit disappointed that we haven't been able to leverage technology as much as we can.
yeah.
So for the last, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years, the buzzwords were IoT, blockchain, all those things, but I don't see
Mm,
that we've been able to use them as much as we could to advance some of those causes you were talking about. How do we make sure homeless people have homes? How do we secure jobs for people?
mm.
Those technologies present a lot of opportunity, but I don't know that we've used them. However, on the social side, we've seen the use of technology by ordinary people really accelerate. And for me, I think that's the biggest change for business. How do you make sure your business is mature enough to keep up with what's happening in the external context in society? We've seen a lot of movements that come together really quickly. And if you're not catching up or if you're not ready, you get left behind. So for me, it's just the pace of change is so quick when it comes to how people are engaging with tech. And I think
Absolutely.
businesses should be ready.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up the like external factors and essentially our socio-political context being a
Exactly.
massive factor that defines how we, the individual, use technology. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the role that the pandemic played in accelerating the role of technology.
I think the pandemic really made us appreciate tech on so many
Mm,
small and big levels. So during the pandemic, we saw everybody suddenly knew how to use Zoom. We were Zoom calling our parents, which I loved because normally, you see your parents at Christmas and Easter if you're lucky. But it was really nice to see a lot of social interactions. We also saw communities around the world getting connected. I think it was during the pandemic when the Black Lives Matter movement became a big thing,
yes.
which for me is still an example of how tech influences the way communities around the world can connect around an issue.
Mm,
And since then, the question for me has been, how do we leverage what we saw during that movement for other causes that are important to us? And I work for Greenpeace, so I have to plug this in. Climate is a really big topic for the
mm,
entire world. It's not like, oh, people in Mozambique are affected or people on the west coast of the US. The whole world is facing this. But we're all facing it in very different ways. We're experiencing it very differently. However, how do we use technology to connect us and find some of those common threads that can lead to like a global mobilization around we need to do something as humanity if we're to survive? And also for other political, like you're saying, issues that are happening. We're seeing a lot of really scary tendencies when it comes to politics. How do we start to connect people around the world using tech? So for me, that's been an interesting question, having observed what happened during the pandemic. The Me Too movement was another one. It just
mm,
went global. And I was telling somebody there's not a single woman that I know that hasn't got a story of some kind
mm.
around that. So how do we find those stories that connect us? And how do we then use tech to amplify them?
That's exactly the question, because I think one of the things that we saw, as you say, with the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, is a global stage in which we were all watching what was happening and we were able to share the message. But I think the bit that comes next is action. And that's always it. So, for example, at the moment, there are lots of videos circulating around the floods in Pakistan, which is a direct result of environmental inequality and global warming. But what I don't know is the next step is how can we change that? How can we have an impact? So, what role do you see yourself and Greenpeace playing in creating the technologies that can help to achieve environmental justice?
I think that's some of the work that we're already doing.
Mm,
We in Greenpeace don't see us as we need to make a change. We see it as we actually have a slogan called a billion acts of courage. So we want people in communities having the courage to take on their governments, to take on their regulators, to take on big companies that are messing up the climate. But what role we can play is one, we have access to a lot of information, we have access to a lot of
mm,
data that these communities can use. Because I can give you an example of a situation where you can go to your leaders now and make all the noise you want, but there are a lot of climate deniers. But if you
mm,
go with facts and figures, it becomes a lot more difficult for them to just brush you off. So I think one of the roles we can play is this access to information that we have. We have a lot of access to research. How do we make that digestible and consumable to communities? That's number one. Number two is we're working on a lot of open source tools that activists can very quickly use to set up a quick website or set up a social channel where they can plan an action in a confidential and safe manner. So that's the role that I see Greenpeace playing. It's facilitating using the resources that we have, but allowing communities who are experiencing and living this reality to actually take action themselves.
yeah, that is such a good point. I think, particularly, we mentioned the socio-political context and the uses of the internet. And we know that there's a lot of misinformation as well as a lot of fantastic information out there. And there are both good and bad uses of technology, with lots of us, for example, from the bad side, being quite addicted to tech and spending far too much time on our phones, feeling a bit overstimulated, for example. But on the other hand, we've seen that ability to really enact change and drive social movements. So, have you got an example of the most powerful use of technology that you've seen over the past few years?
I have a lot of examples. They're not like the biggest examples, but we talked about the Black Lives Matter movement. For
Yeah,
me, the biggest change that has come out of that is the conversations that now organizations are forced to have.
yeah,
Almost every organization is now talking about racial issues that before were kept buried under the carpet
mhm,
or head in the sand type of mentality that we had. We were scared to approach these things, but now everybody's having an EDI conversation, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Pardon me for using
yeah,
acronyms, but everybody is forced. So it's brought that conversation to the top, and then it's gone into very different ways, which I absolutely love that we're talking
mm,
about these things. We're not yet seeing the change as much as I'd love to see it, but it's there. We've also seen on a small scale at country level. So, for example, I'll give you a really good one that I absolutely love being a part of. During the pandemic, we had this thing where it was like young people were using data that were going into their communities and then they were doing something about it. So, I'll give you an example of Bangladesh, where the government had this program for young people, employment opportunities, blah, 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 come to our office, apply. And the young people, after collecting data in the community, did this amazing emotional video of a young guy that sees this ad and wants to go.
mm,
Gets there, he's in a wheelchair, there's no wheelchair ramp. So he can't get into the office and access this opportunity. And I love that after this video went viral, the council office put a ramp for disabled people. So it's small things like that for me that make a big difference. Like just using data, talking, collecting, researching led to some action. So I have millions of those types of examples of really small things that come about.
yeah, and make a humongous difference. It's actually something that I've seen in my day to day. So the company that I work at, called Beam, we crowdfund to support people to upskill and retrain and to remove some of the financial barriers that are stopping them from getting into work. And sometimes there are such small things that you won't necessarily have thought of, like topping up Oyster cards so people can travel freely and get to interviews, or buying their own laptop so that they have a machine in order to make applications on. And all of that requires financial
Yep,
investment. And if
yep,
you don't have that because you don't have a salary and actually, you are a single parent looking after two kids and can't afford childcare, then you do end up in these situations where actually you need someone to see that it
yes.
just takes one or two small things to actually unlock the gates and unlock the access to opportunity. But it's not always so easy or so visible.
Yeah.
And I watched recently your TED talk in preparation for this conversation, which was fantastic, by the way, and has nearly 2 million views, I think.
Will
And
it get
you,
2 million after this conference, do you think?
yeah, we're gonna drive that above 2 million, 100%.
Let's do it.
And as a part of that, you spoke about the importance of everyone having access to a free and fair internet. And given that we're now talking about, quality of opportunity, it feels like a good moment to bring this up. So I'd love to know from your perspective what that means, everyone having access to free and fair internet. And one word you use specifically, which I'd also like to highlight, is feminist, a free, fair, and feminist internet. So what does that mean to you?
This is a topic feel very strongly about, and I could talk for hours, but I will try and keep it short. So, in my world, I feel we all, at least this audience, have access to so much internet that we forget that there are 2 billion people on the planet that don't have access to it. And I'd like to challenge everyone to just take a moment and think what your world would be like without access to the internet. Now, here's what's interesting. When that TED talk was posted on the TED Facebook page, it got so much negativity. Everybody in the chat was like, in the comment section was, tech is bad for us. It's ruining the world. Leave them alone without tech. The irony is you're using the internet
To
to
say
air
that.
your opinion and your views, but you don't want other people to have that voice that you have.
Mm,
So for me, it's giving everybody access to information, giving everybody a voice, making sure that people can engage in conversation from the right level. We've
mm,
had these conversations when we're talking about decolonization. The power dynamics are very different based on the information levels you have.
mhm.
So the more equitable we can make access to information, and in this day and age, that probably means access to the internet in some way, shape, or form, the better for everybody. We can have richer governance conversations, richer political, social issues, because then we get more perspectives in. However, I do think that even as we think about this, and this is where the feminist word comes in, we have to make sure we're creating a safe space for different types of people.
Mm.
And I know when people think feminist, they think women. I think feminist is broader than women. It's better humanity. So for me, that's what I mean when I talk about a feminist internet. Is it safe? Is it secure? Will I be given the space that I need? That sort of thinking is what went into that conversation that I had in that TED talk.
And that's a fantastic point, and actually something that you said very early on when you were talking about the role that Greenpeace plays is ensuring that there is a safe place for people to share information and, involved in political actions. Why is that safety bit so important to you?
Oh, because if we don't create that safe space, then we are basically defeating the purpose. So if you want me to have a voice, but then I feel unsafe, I won't speak.
Mm.
So in the end, it's a zero-sum game if we can't create that safety. And I think all of us as humans crave safety and when I talk about safety, it's not just physical safety, it's psychological safety as well. So for me, I think it's really important, particularly like I was saying, where the power dynamics are not yet even. It's
Mm.
even more important that somebody that's coming from maybe a socioeconomic background that is not so much, my English might not be as good as yours. It's still important that if I want my voice heard, I feel safe to come into that space and be given the chance to voice my opinion, my thoughts. And I have experiences where you get young people from communities that everybody calls less privileged or underprivileged or poor or whatever
Mhm.
words,
Mhm.
and you give them the space, the insights they bring to that conversation. It's like you have light bulbs because they're seeing things from a very different perspective. You're seeing it from a very different perspective. So it's really rich when you bring those perspectives together. And for me, that's really like core to humanity getting to where we need to get to.
100%. And you mentioned obviously psychological safety there, and it's actually a big topic at the moment in the diversity and inclusion world, which brings us on nicely to talking a bit about the workplace and your experiences in the workplace. We are here as part of Black Tech Fest. There will be lots of viewers watching who are young people wanting to get into the industry from Black backgrounds. And so I'd love to hear a bit about your experience of rising to the top, being in all of these senior leadership positions across NGOs, charities, in tech roles. What's your experience been, and what advice would you give to people who are in the early stages of their careers?
Let me just say, I am in Paris right now. I went to breakfast this morning. And I kid you not, a lady walked up to me and asked if I work in the restaurant. And it happened to me in Amsterdam as well 2 months ago. So
Yeah.
let me just say the journey has not been easy, even at work. But I was fortunate enough. When I started, I was really young, I was tiny, I was excited, and I got into the World Food Program. But I was fortunate enough to have a regional IT chief that was Ugandan. He was older. And he met me for the first time and he was like, sit down, we need to talk. And he said three things to me, which today would not be appropriate, but I'm glad he did. He said, listen, you're young, you're female, you're black. All these things will work against you, but I need you to know now so you can deal with it. And I'm really grateful that he did that because then I just changed the slogan to I'm young, I'm female, I'm black, and those are my superpowers.
Mm.
And so rather than allow the external noise, and it came, it was a lot.
Mm.
Rather than allow the external noise to shape how I acted, I took it as these are my superpowers. I'm in a room, I'm in a meeting of 40 people, I'm the only female. That means nobody else has the perspective that I have.
Mm.
So I will bring that perspective and they will. And as much as they resisted it, the value would be clear because I'd be bringing in things that they haven't thought about. So, for young people that are starting in the industry, I will tell you there'll be times where you want to beat everyone in the room. Don't
Mm.
do it. But my top advice is just don't allow the noise to distract you from the mission. because then you prove them right. And sometimes it's a very, very, to this day, I face it. It's a very deliberate attempt at distracting you so they can say, we told you she couldn't do it.
Mm.
So you have to be very clear what is valid feedback and what is just noise. And sometimes you have to fight and stand your ground, but pick and choose your battles. Have some non-negotiables. So I have non-negotiables. You're disrespectful to me, we're going at it.
Mm.
You pass a stupid comment that I can live with, I'm not letting you waste my time. So have some non-negotiables that you will fight for to the end, and then have some things where you're like, this is noise that's meant to distract me. That would be my advice.
That's fantastic advice. And one of the things that really stood out to me there, which was very poignant, is that you had a champion, a cheerleader who sat you down and said, I'm going to give you some advice, whether solicited or unsolicited, and this is going to help guide you. And those have become some of your guiding principles throughout your career. What do you think is the role for mentorship, particularly within the Black community? And how do people go about finding the right mentor for them?
Oh, it's unbelievably important. It's unbelievably important. Otherwise, it gets very lonely very quickly, especially as you go up in the ranks. Because then,
Mm,
to date, unfortunately, you see fewer and fewer people like you,
mm,
and you get a lot of those aggressions I was talking about. I gave an example of somebody asking if I'm a waitress in a restaurant,
yeah.
not for the first time, many times, but you get it in the office as well. You're being
Mm,
asked to make tea. When I started out, that was one thing. I have some hacks around how to not be asked to make tea, asked to take the minutes every time so you can't contribute to the conversation because you're too busy taking the notes and it's not your job. I'm an IT
mm,
support person. Why am I always taking the minute meetings? So there will be a lot of aggressions, a lot of things that you don't even realize are problematic.
mm,
But I do think there's, if you can find mentors that help guide you. But for me, what was more important than mentors in the workplace and what helped me rise were sponsors. And the
mm.
difference, the distinction I make is mentors will guide you. I will go and be like, listen, this happened in the meeting today. How should I approach it? With sponsors, you don't, these were people that looked at me, identified a talent, and then they helped me nurture. And these are people who would be sitting in a meeting and mentioning my name and being like, we have this problem. Have you checked with Priscilla if she has any ideas? And so they bring you into the room. And I think those people are really important. But when engaging with mentors and sponsors, my top tip is humility, because sometimes their feedback is harsh. Sometimes their feedback feels like they're giving me extra work. Just do the work. Do the work. Make sure that if you're getting feedback, even if it's painful and difficult to digest, take the time to think through it. And honestly, that has been the key. The other thing I will say for that is because in the tech space, at least I started 20 years ago, there weren't very many women in the tech space. I ended up with a lot of male mentors who are
Mm.
mostly black men. I can't think of a single one that wasn't a black man, but they had the power. So I was not picking to say I'm looking for a woman. I was like, who's got the power to get me to where I want to get to?
Mm.
And I will. So my other tip is whoever has the space that you need or is in the space you need to get to, leverage that.
Absolutely. And that is so key. I've had a couple of similar to you champions in my career and sponsors in particular. And it is about that bringing you into the room and allowing you to flourish and
Yeah.
helping you sometimes to prompt you, give that bit of preparation and say, right, you were going to come into this room. You're going to be surrounded by people who are a lot more senior than you. And there are three key points you're going to want to get across. How are you going to
Yes.
communicate those? And how are you going to leave a lasting impression? And I think
Yes.
that is always so important, is to think, what's the core of the message that I need to share here? And how do I leave a lasting impression?
Yes.
And
Absolutely
on
right.
that note, I note that we are coming towards the end of the time that we have. And in order to end with a lasting impression, I'm going to ask a big question as the final one, which is, in your opinion, does technology help to close the gap between inequality, or does it worsen it?
That's a big question.
It is.
Both, both, but from the context I'm coming from, as a Zambian, right now it's worsening it for the most
Mm,
part. It does help because we gave some examples as we're having this conversation of connecting people, giving access to information, leveling the playing field. But then we run into challenges, two primary challenges that I see. Number one, we forget that there are people that don't have access. So, and if you watch the TED Talk, I talked about how during the pandemic, my kids were having online classes. I had people who couldn't learn. I kept my job because we just installed Zoom and Teams and everything else. We had people who lost their jobs because they didn't have that ability to have access to technology. So that's on the one hand, the inequitable access. But on the other hand as well, I keep talking about equal access to information, etc., etc. But we are seeing, and this is not a secret, it's a conversation everybody's having, that the algorithms that the big tech giants are putting in place are not giving us access to equitable information. So for me, that's widening the gap. It's polarizing. If I'm only seeing far right or far left messages, that is increasing my equality in terms of access to digital, because now I'm being pushed into one specific corner. And not many of us have what it takes to understand this and game the algorithm so that I have full access to the information that I need to have. Very few of us are able to figure that out. So I will forever get information about how this is the only message and this is the person you must vote for. So I do think it's widening that gap, because if I'm making judgments based on the wrong set of data or a skewed set of data, then that widens the gap for me. That's how I feel. I still strongly think it has the ability to connect us, has the ability to reduce those gaps, but we need to be very deliberate about it.
And if you had one call to action to everyone who goes on to watch this talk to be deliberate about it, what would that call to action be?
Ooh. I have many calls to action because I have many causes. But the one call to action is, I would like to ask you to think about how you will use technology to advance something that's close to you for the betterment of humanity. I don't know what's close to your heart. It could be homes for the homeless. It could be blankets for the people who are sleeping outside. It could be climate change. But how will you leverage technology to advance that conversation that's important to you?
What a fantastic note to end on. Well, thank you so much, Priscilla. It has been a delight to be able to talk to you, and thanks for sharing all of the knowledge with us.
Likewise, Yasmina, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Deliveroo presents The Order. You've now crossed over into the pizza zone, a window of pizzery anticipation. Your mind has melted into mozzarella. Pizza, 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 pizza. Ooh. Go on, do a little pizza dance. Dance round and round like a pizza. Oh, that was quick. Nice jacket. Oh, bingo. Deliveroo. Food, we get it.
Hey, come and hear this story.
I'm Christiana, I'm the co-founder of Eats and Beats. My passion is bringing people together with food and music. We decided to start Eats and Beats because we wanted to find an avenue that can bring people together, and we just found that food is always the best way to do that. We chose to set up a domain with GoDaddy, and we just felt it was important to have a professional email address. We do a lot of goodie bags for our events. It was a bit difficult to be contacting all these brands and be having like a personal Gmail or Hotmail account. I was really impressed by the customer service. The person I spoke to was really helpful. and no question is a silly question. Client care is so important to me, and I was just immediately impressed, and I just felt comfortable to put my business in the hands of GoDaddy.
For the help and tools you need to grow online, GoDaddy.